Lindsay and welcome back to another video on my channel. Today I thought we would do like more of a chill, like low-key video where I do a bad reading of some previous works. I saw where Caleb at Insane Reader does these things where he goes over his like original work that he wrote as like a young teenager or a child and tells the story in a really funny way. And I have some really funny slash cringy old works that I would like to share with you guys in a similar fashion. I'm going to be sharing with you guys this short story that I wrote in, I believe it was high school, I think it was my junior year, about a young, at heart, old woman named Edith Gert, who is trying her very darndest to escape from her nursing home. I think this is so funny and it's so cute, but it's like written kind of cringy. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I did not know writing rules and things like that when I was like 16. We're gonna go over this. We're gonna have some laughs. This is all lighthearted. There might be some stuff that's not very politically correct. No one was woke back in 2009, so we're just gonna roll with it. In Sunny Acres retirement home, Edith Gert sat in her favorite rickety maroon armchair outside of her bedroom. The antique grandfather clock stationed beside her must have lulled her into sleep with its rhythmic ticking, as it had done every afternoon preceding her bingo match. Her half-moon glasses had slipped down her liver-spotted nose to rest on her chest, in which deep, fitful breaths were being oxidized. Why? And then we go on to describe her more. She's adorned in her favorite outfit, which consists of a blue cotton sweatpants, a golden brooch that matches the mini bangles on her arthritic arms. She's wearing a turtleneck, which is an Easter sweater from the 70s, and tennis shoes. Because all of these details were very important. As the nursing aides walk past the slumbering senior, many of them smile to themselves, thinking of how sweet Mrs. Gert looks just like their grandmother, or the kind elderly woman down the street. But Mrs. Gert was nothing like their grandmothers. As the last nurse passes to set up afternoon tea, Edith cracked open one of her eyes, glancing left to right in a shifty manner. Deciding the coast was clear, she shifted her weight slowly back and forward, and then in parentheses I put with much grunting and cracking of joints, until she had scooted to the edge of her seat. Reaching over to the wall where she propped up her handy walker, Mrs. Gert grabbed her means of transportation and began to shuffle down the hall with a sneer. "Ha! Young whippersnappers!" crackled Edith. Which I should say cackled, but she's crackling apparently. Cackled Edith, chomping down on her dentures. "They'll never catch me this time. I'm blowing this popsicle stand." I forgot about this part. But 10 minutes later and 5 feet from her original starting point, Mrs. Gert was exhausted, wiping her dampened brow and peering over her shoulder at her favorite chair just out of reach. She cursed loudly. "What the blue devil am I supposed to do now?" Mrs. Gert exclaimed, spitting on the floor. Desperate, she craned her neck around in search of salvation. Only then did she notice she had stopped outside of Mr. Belinsky's room. Boris Belinsky was a new member of Sunny Acres Center who had just joined Mrs. Gert's ward last week, all the way from Poland. Polish people stay in Poland. Don't come here. Our health system is crap. Oh, poor Mr. Belinsky. He was a morbidly obese man, but had cultivated a mustache to rival his weight. He did not speak a lick of English. Scanning into Mr. Belinsky's room, Edith spotted what she was scouting for. The Flash Hawk Magnum XL 200 power scooter! The fastest motor scooter in the making today, only available in Europe. The scooter was cherry apple red with a bolt of lightning running down the length of the model. Chrome wheels held up the patent leather seat, and then in parentheses I put extra wide for Mr. Belinsky's expansive bottom. Okay. And state-of-the-art control system between two jelly-gripped handlebars, directing the machine at the slightest touch. This reminds me so much of the description of the Nimbus 2000 in Harry Potter. Like, obviously it's a different thing, but like, I definitely borrowed from that description. Upon hearing Mr. Boris's deep snores, Mrs. Gert snuck into his doorway where the vehicle was parked, quiet as a mouse. Noticing the little silver key was still in the ignition, Edith screeched with glee and plopped down in the driver's seat. Her scream awoke poor Mr. Belinsky, who let out a yell and tumbled off his bed onto the floor. And then I have like a bunch of Russian, and I don't actually know what that says, and I'm actually terrified to like know just in case I like had him say something really offensive. But Boris is yelling at her in Russian at this point. I probably used a really bad Google Translate. Edith turns the key in the ignition and felt the automobile beneath her purr itself to life. Stomping down hard on the gas, Mrs. Gert was flung back against the backrest with the speed of takeoff. And then Edith Sweet, beautiful grandmother Edith looks at poor, flailing Mr. Bolinski, and as she whips out the door says, "No wonder you lost the war." What war was that? Do I even know? Probably what, like World War II? I don't know, seems like a pretty crappy thing to say to someone, but thinking right so hard that the scooter wheeled up on its two back tires, Edith entered the main hall, cackling. I love that word, cackling. I wonder how many times I've used it in this manuscript so far. A large procession of senior citizens were being escorted to tea by a young nurse who looked like her greatest desire in life was a cigarette break. "Come on, Mr. Blackwood, quickly now," she said in a perturbed tone to a shriveled old Ernest Blackwood, who was 98 years old. "Time for tea." As Edith came upon the group of shuffling elders, she slammed her hand down on the scooter horn with all of her might and plowed towards the mass. "Get out of my way, you old farts!" she bellowed. Mr. Blackwood peered up with his cataract-filled eyes and was just able to make out a flaming red object moving towards them at atomic speed. "Fire!" Mr. Blackwood screamed with the agility of a much younger man, dove out of Mrs. Gert's path, and double-tuck rolled over to the wall. Gracefully coming out of the flip, he landed on his feet. Ernest lifted the fire extinguisher off its safety holder and took aim into the frantic crowd. Pulling the trigger, Mr. Blackwood doused them in thick, creamy fire repellent as he screamed and limped for the fire exit in total chaos. "Mr. Blackwood, put that down this instant!" the nurse yelled. "What do you think you're—" But the rest of her words were morphed into a wail as Mrs. Gert hit her with the scooter and proceeded to run her over. Edith's body was jarred side to side as each wail hit the nurse's body and finally clumped back down to steady ground. Turning back to look at the infuriated nurse still squabbling on the carpet, Mrs. Gert reminded, "I told you to get out of the way," and chuckled to herself. Swerving side to side down the hall, Mrs. Gert next turned into the kitchen, where a woman was sitting at a table eating chocolate pudding in a styrofoam bowl. Her dentures were laying on a blue napkin beside her snack, while the woman happily smacked her lips together, grinning at her food in delight. Edith stepped over to the old woman and grinned crookedly down at her. "I hope you were finished with that," said Edith, and she snatched the bowl from the old woman's grasp, knocking her dentures to the side with a sweep of her hand and sped off. Edith is that The old woman burst into tears as Mrs. Gert fled the room. That's like actually heartbreaking. Like, poor pudding lady. I feel you, girl. Entering the main hall again, Mrs. Gert momentarily parked to enjoy her newly acquired and delicious bowl of pudding. After she finished the bowl, Edith belched boisterously and threw the empty bowl over her back and began to scan for the nursing home exit. Spotting it 20 yards from where she parked, she revved her engine loudly, ready to take off. Now was her moment of escape. After years in Sunny Acres, she, Edith Gert, was going to be free. This reminds me of the Dobby is free. A smile broke across Edith's face as she lifted her foot off the brake and wham! Edith's scooter was fishtailed by another scooter while Edith was covered in a thick layer of white fluff and a goopy brown substance. Edith cursed wildly as she was pitched from her scooter and hit the carpet bum first. Her swear words were mingled with fluent angry Polish that was being shouted down at her from Mr. Bolinski on a second scooter. After he had seen her take his scooter, he borrowed his roommate's scooter to track Edith down. A mixture of fire repellent and chocolate pudding was caked in Edith's hair after Mr. Blackwood saw Mrs. Gert drive by and thought she was a ball of fire and shot her with a blast of his extinguisher. Also, the little woman went back to the refrigerator after her bowl of pudding was stolen, carried the whole tub of pudding outside the room and dumped it on Mrs. Gert's unsuspecting head. "I got her, Molly, don't worry," a male nurse said, reaching for the deranged Mrs. Gert who was spitting and punching the ground. "Thank God, Alex, that woman is crazy. This is the third time this week she's done this to me," the nurse Molly said, running up to Alex. Upon closer look, Edith noticed the black angry tire tracks running across the woman's livid face and arms. Edith flung more curses at the nurse. "Did she really run you over, Molly?" the nurse Alex asked jestingly as he picked Mrs. Gert up and flung her over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. Mrs. Gert squawked and began to grab fistfuls of Alex's hair and yank. "Yes!" and "Yes!" Earlier today, she hit the janitor with his own dustpan, threatened him with a sewing needle, and demanded she was escorted out. Before that, she stole Mrs. Cole's oxygen tank and tried to burst open— my Jersey accent is so bad. I'm so sorry if you're from New York. Tried to burst open a window with it. Poor Mrs. Cole nearly died from lung failure. She needs to be in the insanity ward, not the Alzheimer's ward. I can't. Well, Alex said, untangling Mrs. Gert's hand from his hair. Let's get her back to her room. She'll forget this all happened by the time we get there. You'll never take me alive, sonny boy, Edith vowed, squirming around him. After walking Edith to her room, Molly and Alex placated her with a hot bath, clean clothes, and more chocolate pudding. Hours later, Edith had forgotten the entire exciting incident. She sat outside her room in her favorite rickety maroon armchair, asleep next to the antique grandfather clock. As visitors and nurses walked past the slumbering senior, many smiled to themselves, thinking of how sweet Mrs. Gert looked so much like their grandmothers. But Mrs. Gert was nothing like your grandmothers! As the last of the nurses paced by to set up for dinner, Edith cracked open one of her eyes, glancing left to right with a wicked smile. The end. So that was my short story, my very favorite baby short story about our wonderful anti-hero, Edith Gert. Now, I have noticed that since writing this short story, it is not titled. So I would like to ask you, my dearly beloved subscribers, to help me name this wonderful story. So leave your titles down in the comments below. I will pick my favorite one. If you guys like this kind of video, let me know. I do kind of want to do this with my first book, which was a really, really bad thriller. So let me know if you like it. I might do more videos like this. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!